counsel, Anjali Shashidhar, Dwight Payton. We will be representing the state of Midlands in today's case.
Good morning to all of you.
Introductions for the defense, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good morning, Your Honor. Sierra Vakili for the defense.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Eli Tannenwald for the defense.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Madison Thomas for the defense.
Good morning.
And seated to my left is Ms. Jordan Ryder.
Good morning.
Your Honor, before we begin, the state just has a couple of pretrial matters.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to invoke Rule 615, or the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. In today's case, the state has no party representative.
Are you also invoking whatever the rule is that constructively swears in the witnesses?
Rule 603 can be invoked, Your Honor.
All right.
No objection to either 603 or 615, Your Honor.
Very well. Any further pretrial matters for the prosecution?
Your Honor, considering the courtroom, we just asked your preferences about moving in the well, approaching opposing counsel, as well as witnesses.
It is quite snug in here. You're welcome to move about over there. I think if you come any closer, you're going to be on my lap. So you can move about there. And with regard to approaching counsel, you need not ask the court's permission to do so. You do need to ask permission to approach a witness or approach the bench.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the state is ready for trial.
Very well. Any matters for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Briefly, we'd like the court to note that as the defendant, Jordan Ryder is our party representative with no need to induct.
Of course.
Furthermore, we'd like to tender a form that dictates that we intend to offer character evidence signed by both parties.
She is a loving, caring parent.
We'll get to that later.
Is that the character evidence you're offering?
No, this is a form of our intent to offer character evidence. In the state of Midlands, rebuttal witnesses cannot be offered, so this prevents a mishap in which someone would have evidence offered and not be able to testify again in their own defense.
So the character evidence you're offering has to do with peacefulness?
Yes, Your Honor. On our case in chief, we'll be offering that trait for Ms. Ryder, which means we had to indicate that to them before trial, which allows them to introduce rebuttal evidence to that during their case in chief.
I've seen this utilized for purposes of introducing the character trait of loving, caring parent, but this will be the first one on peacefulness, so I look forward to that. All right.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, we're ready to proceed with trial.
Prosecution ready?
Your Honor, just one more matter. In most jurisdictions, it's commonly assumed that objections are heard out of the earshot of the jury. May we assume the same in your courtroom?
Of course.
And with that, Your Honor, the state is ready for trial.
Very well. All right, then prosecution, you may present your opening statement.
May it please the court.
Back here. Thank you.
Follow the crime. From the fight, to the fracture, to the fall. It's July 14, 2018. A mother and a daughter arrive here at Midlands and begin to go on a hike. Now the daughter, well, she's 12-year-old Parker Page. And the mother, well, she's the defendant, Jordan Ryder. Folks, Parker dies on that trail. She dies when the defendant rips a hiking stick out of her hands and jabs it, knocking her daughter off the edge of a cliff 40 feet to her death. We recognize this isn't your average case. We're here because a mother murdered her own child. But to find out how we wound up in this courtroom today, we have to go back to the very beginning. Now, Ms. Ryder's been in this courtroom before. She was sentenced and convicted to 12 years in prison for selling drugs. And when she went away, she left someone behind, her 6-year-old daughter, Parker. Now, while the defendant and her daughter were separated, well, their relationship, it breaks. The defendant gets out 6 years later to find her daughter to be someone she doesn't even know. Parker's taller, she's smarter, and most importantly, she's been diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta, or brittle bones disease. Now, this disease has forced the defendant to go into some narrow straits. She comes back, and she doesn't know how to handle it. She doesn't know what to do. So in order to repair the broken relationship with her daughter, she takes her to a campground here in Midlands called Calkins Campground. And while on that campground, they go hiking up the Lecaron Loop. Now, you're going to meet a hiker who was on the trail that day. And he's going to come up here and tell you how he saw the defendant and her daughter fighting. and how he saw the defendant rip a hiking stick out of her daughter's hands and jab it at her, missing by just that much. Now that hiker, he doesn't go away, he stays on that trail. And later he hears Parker yell a couple things at her mother. I hate you. I wish you never gotten out of jail in the first place. Why can't you be more like Corbin? After hearing this, the defendant snaps. In a fit of overwhelming rage, she snatches the hiking stick just as she did before and jabs it at her daughter, just as she did before. Only this time, she doesn't miss. She strikes her daughter, fractures her collarbone, and knocks her 40 feet over that cliff to her death. Members of the jury, a mother is staring down at her dying daughter. Most of us would panic. Most of us would do anything and everything to save our child. But not the defendant. Instead, what she does is she goes down that trail, gets in her car, and drives to the nearest place with Wi-Fi. While there, she files a life insurance policy change. You'll see that insurance form, ladies and gentlemen. And you'll see how the insurance was raised from $10,000 to $200,000. After that, the defendant gets back in her car, drives back to her campsite, and goes to sleep. $200,000 richer. Now that insurance form, it was recovered by the lead detective in today's case. And he's going to come up here and he's going to walk you all through the scene of the crime. From the top of that cliff where the victim and her daughter were fighting, all the way to the bottom where they found the victim's body. He's also going to bring you two key pieces of evidence. The first, a note, handwritten by the defendant. And the second is the murder weapon in today's case, the hiking stick. Now normally you'd expect a murder weapon to be found lying next to the victim. But instead, the detective's going to tell you that he found that murder weapon right next to the person who used it, the defendant. Now that murder weapon, it was turned over to the chief medical examiner here in Midlands. And she's going to come up here and she's going to tell you all how the end of that hiking stick matched the bruising on Parker's left collarbone exactly. Now folks, I want to talk about why you're here today. We, as the state, have the burden to bear in today's case. We have to prove to you all, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant pushed her daughter off that cliff knowing she would cause death or serious injury. Now, beyond a reasonable doubt, it's not beyond all doubt. Rather, it means that any questions you have by the end of today's trial, well, we as the state are going to answer them. Members of the jury, if you follow the crime from that fight to that fracture, all the way to when the victim fell to her death, we're confident you'll find the defendant, Jordan Ryder, guilty in today's case. Thank you.
Thank you. Only one thing, you didn't indicate which charge you were pursuing in the trial. I'm assuming it's aggravated murder?
Yes, Your Honor. The charge is aggravated murder.
All right, thank you. Defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Grief, not guilt. When I was a junior in high school, in the locker room after baseball practice, my friend said something terrible about my little sister. So I got angry. I yelled, and I expected a fight. Instead, he sat down and cried, sobbing into his hands. He told us that his dad had died 2 days before. None of us knew. What he had said, he hadn't meant. And what he had felt, he couldn't say. The idea that in a time of grief you might act irrationally isn't a concept that needs further explanation. Today, it's a reality the state is asking you to forget. Throughout today's case, you'll realize that all they have is evidence of a grieving woman. Ask yourself, do they have a complete investigation? Do they have a credible accusation? Do they even have a single eyewitness? Don't let the prosecution confuse Jordan's grief for her guilt. Now, Mr. Osteen just came before you and painted a particular picture of Jordan. He's a prosecutor. That's his job. But will they present their case in chief? Take a step back, keep an open mind, and wait to hear our side of the story. When you do, you'll realize that the evidence today presents a truth that allows for tragedy. You'll learn that Parker didn't die on that hike. Parker and Jordan made it back to camp together. They settled in, making s'mores, making up for lost time. Jordan closes her eyes and wakes to a mother's worst nightmare. Parker is nowhere to be found. Jordan searches desperately, but then that desperate mother is forced into handcuffs, forced to judgment by a detective blinded by the need to blame. And while that detective concluded his investigation, even today, Jordan is still searching for answers. Still, in today's case, Jordan will face incredible accusations. But through each and every one of them, remember one thing. They must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The state must make their case to you today without you questioning a single thing they say. The highest burden of proof in our judicial system rests entirely on this table. Well, it will never switch over to the defense's side of the courtroom. We will still call 3 witnesses today to instill that reasonable doubt. The first is the owner of a cafe that Jordan and Parker visited the day of the accident. Ms. Remy Mouchard will take the stand and testify to an incomplete police investigation. A detective who refused receipts that she offered, who was in and out of her cafe in less than 10 minutes. Second, you'll hear from our own expert in forensic pathology, Dr. Edwin Lopez. Dr. Lopez actually hired the prosecution's own Dr. Quincy many years ago. Today, he's here to speak on several key mistakes that Dr. Quincy made, as well as the flaws in her assumption that the hiking staff Parker used were used to kill Parker. Finally, you'll hear from Jordan herself. My client has a constitutional right to remain silent. She was interrogated hours after the death of her only daughter. Her words were twisted as she was robbed of her freedom in a time of desperation. Today, because of that, she is here to set the record straight. We all know that there's already been one victim. Don't create another one. At the end of today's trial, I'm confident you will find the only just verdict. Jordan Ryder is grieving, not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Prosecution, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The people call Detective Chesney. And may we set the well?
Yes. There will be a standing court order that all sides are welcome to get up and move about the courtroom in order to be able to